In this tutorial we are going to knit the leg of our sock and shape our toe. At this stage you will have had all of your instep stitches will equal the number of stitches that you have in your sole, and you'll have all of your shaping done as well. Now we're ready to work the first round of the leg. So in this case we're working in stocking stitch, so there isn't really anything that special about this. It's all of your rounds worked in stocking stitch. Of course, if you are working as per previous tutorials, if you're working continuing a pattern, etc., you will incorporate that into your round. Now the one thing I will show you here though that is quite useful is if you place a marker after you've just done the first round, placing that marker just after you've done that round means that you can then tell how many rows you do exactly in your foot, and that's important for matching to your socks. As we see in this one, there's the marker that I placed at the left hand side is the one similar to what I've placed just now, and I know that I'm going to need to knit the same number of rows for my next sock. So it's really handy, particularly if you get second sock syndrome. You have an exact number of rows in mind, and it means that you're likely to knit. Well, I find myself knitting more quickly when I know exactly how many rows I have to do, rather than kind of just knitting an unknown number of rows. So that's just a little tip. You don't have to do it, but it's just something I find quite handy. At this point as well, you'll have measured your foot to make sure you have the right fit, and the length of your foot is the desired length, and in the pattern you'll see that you are to knit to a certain length before that, and you knit that from the back of the heel, so that's all the way the full length of the knit sock. So now we're ready to knit on, and there isn't anything special about the foot except that it is just knit in stocking stitch rounds, slipping all of the markers as you come to them. And once I've that done, I'll be back and I will show you, we will work on the toe shaping. So just finishing the last round of the sock before we come to the toe shaping. I would say that this is where Sock Wonder is more fiddly than other needles, and I often change to double pointed needles at this point because they're not the best needle in the world for working a toe. But we're going to show you how to do it because sometimes you don't have all the needles you want when you want them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about where the shaping takes place. So you have at one side, you have the instep stitches, which are on the top, and you have your sole stitches, which are on the bottom. And you'll see the two markers that we placed earlier, your start and end of insteps markers, and that is where the shaping takes place. So it takes place on both sides of the sock at those markers. So your decreasing takes place on the left and the right and above your toes. It takes about the first 2/3 are worked as a decrease round, then a knit round, decrease round, knit round, and then the last ones where your shaping comes in more quickly is just decrease rounds. We'll cover that, that's all covered in the pattern for this, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you, I'm going to work the first decrease round so that you can see that on the short circular needles. So we're now ready to work our first decrease round. Make sure we put our marker back in because you still need to know where the center of round is for now. Now the decreasing takes place based on the marker. So the first thing you're going to do is you knit to 3 stitches before the start of instep marker. And this is all detailed in the pattern. Then you're going to knit the 2 stitches here together as your first decrease. So that's by inserting your needle into the 2 stitches as if to knit them, and then knit them together. That decreases 1 stitch, then you knit 1, you slip your marker, you knit the next stitch, and then you're going to do the matching decrease, and that is a slip, slip, knit, as you've done previously. Then you're going to knit on to 3 stitches before the instep, which is different to the gusset shaping where all of the shaping took place only on the sole / heel stitches. So this time you're shaping on both the sole, heel stitches and the instep stitches. So now I'm going to knit the 3 stitches before that marker, and I'm going to do the other side decreases. And that is a knit 2 together decrease as well. That has to do with the way the decrease leans to the right. So you knit those 2 stitches together, knit 1, slip your marker, knit another, and then you're going to do a matching slip, slip, knit here, and this is what creates the correct leaning in your stitches. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this round, and then I'm going to work a knit round in it. The trick with the short circular needles is there comes a point when you can no longer work in the round like this because you have too few stitches. So I'm going to work until I get to that point, and then I will show you how I manipulate my needles to allow me to continue working the tiny circumferences in the round. I won't lie, it's definitely fiddly, but it is worth knowing how to do. So I will go away and I'll be back shortly. Before I do that, I just want to show you what it looks like after I've worked both a decrease and a plain knit round. And you can see that the shaping is taking place down along both sides on the marked sides of it. And that's just to show you the decreasing. So now once you've worked a number of decrease and plain rounds, you're on to needing to manipulate the needle to continue. What I do is I bunch up all of my stitches. It's at about 32 stitches for me on the double knitting, and it's a higher number for the 4-ply for the 2.5mm sock wonder. So what I do is I bunch up all my stitches, I get them lined up on the small needle on the left hand side, and then as if I were doing magic loop, I take my needle and I twist it around to go in, and I will not lie, it is fiddly, but it is useful because you never know when you're only going to have one needle, so it's worth doing. So you keep them nice and tight in as if you were making a magic loop stitch, so you want to stay well into the cable so that it doesn't go baggy on you. Now you're just going to continue using the cable and the end of the needle to give you a little bit of leverage on it, because the needle is small in itself and it is a tight little circle at this stage. So you move it over, try not to let your stitch marker stop you, and then you're just going to knit two together as you were doing normally. So you're trying to do two things at the same time here. You are manipulating your needle and continuing to work your decreases for your sock. But there isn't anything, once you get used to it, it's fiddly but useful. I would definitely have moved to double pointed needles at this point. But I want you to see all of the different ways of doing this. And then once I've done enough stitches that I don't want to work anymore, I'm then going to take my needle, pull it through as if again magic looping, only a teeny tiny magic loop, and then I position it again to work the next part of my sock. And you can see the circumference is getting smaller and smaller as you go. So I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to be back once I am down to the last row. And then you'll see what really fiddly is. So I'm now working the very last round, the very end of my last round of shaping. So it's a knit one, a slip slip knit. You're definitely fighting the needle at this stage. And you're just going to come back to the start of the round. You're almost there, pull through, and you are all the way around now, so that you can just see that you have a teeny tiny circle of stitches on your needles. So the next thing you're going to do, you've worked all of your decreasing in the toe, and you're just going to get this part ready now to graft those stitches. So the first thing that you do is you knit the last 4 stitches on the underside, on the sole stitches of your sock. You knit those on to make sure that they've been worked, and that your yarn is at one side of the sock. So you just knit those stitches, you don't do any shaping in these. And then you can remove this instep marker as well. Now bring your needle through, and now what you have is these stitches on the top of your sock and on the bottom are essentially facing one another, so they're aligned so that it's easier now that they'll be ready to graft. So the next thing you do is, using your remaining instep marker as a marker, you pull through the cable and you place both sets of needles onto your needle ends, both sets of stitches onto your needle ends, and then they are ready to graft. Now we're going to do the grafting just on the double pointed needles tomorrow, but you can see that these are exactly the same as if you were going to graft them. One thing to make sure of here is that you have the same number of stitches top and bottom, and that's really important, because grafting and fudging a graft where you don't have the same number of stitches, it's just not worth it.